Well, President Trump is fond of saying that he's done more for the Black community than any president since Abraham Lincoln.
Donald Trump's assertion that he has done more for the Black community than any president since Abraham Lincoln stands in stark contrast to Samuel L. Jackson's incisive critique, revealing a clash between political rhetoric and systemic reality. Trump's claim, rooted in selective historical framing and narrowly defined policies, unravels under scrutiny when juxtaposed with the structural reforms of past presidents and the lived experiences of Black Americans. At the heart of this tension lies a fundamental question: can symbolic gestures and cherry-picked metrics substitute for substantive progress in addressing centuries of systemic racism? Trump's narrative leans heavily on the First Step Act, 2018, a bipartisan criminal justice reform law that reduced mandatory minimum sentences and freed thousands of nonviolent offenders, many of whom were Black. While impactful, critics argue it sidestepped systemic issues like racial profiling, cash bail disparities, and the overcriminalization of drug offenses, failures that perpetuate mass incarceration's racial inequities. Similarly, opportunity zones, marketed as economic lifelines for marginalized communities, often prioritize tax breaks for affluent developers over addressing generational wealth gaps or redlining's enduring scars. Even Trump's touting of pre-pandemic Black unemployment lows, 5.4% in 2019, obscured persistent wage gaps and the fragility of economic gains later erased by COVID-19. These policies, coupled with symbolic gestures like temporary funding extensions for historically Black colleges and universities, HBCU, initiatives largely inherited from the Obama era, reflect a pattern of performative allyship. Jackson's rebuttal cuts through this veneer by highlighting the administration's lack of Black representation, evident in a cabinet with only a handful of Black officials, such as Ben Carson and Jaron Smith, and its rollback of Obama-era civil rights protections. He underscores a disconnect between rhetoric and accountability. Jackson's dismissal of Jared Kushner's remark that Trump can't want them to be successful more than they want to be successful epitomizes this critique. The comment, steeped in neoliberal individualism, reduces systemic barriers like discriminatory policing, voter suppression, and the school-to-prison pipeline to matters of personal effort, ignoring centuries of institutionalized oppression. For Jackson, progress is measured not by self-congratulatory claims but by tangible outcomes. Diversifying leadership, closing wealth gaps, and dismantling structural inequities.
We know who they are. We know how they feel about the Black community, and they said a lot of things about what they've done and what they haven't done, and we can see evidence of that by the number of Black people that are in the administration and what they do, particularly for the Black community. So, I mean, that's something you should take seriously, really.
Historically, Trump's invocation of Lincoln serves as a strategic sleight of hand. While Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, and the 13th Amendment, 1865, abolished slavery, Reconstruction's collapse under Jim Crow revealed the limits of emancipation without economic and political empowerment. Later presidents, like Lyndon B. Johnson, pursued transformative reforms. The Civil Rights Act, 1964, and Voting Rights Act, 1965, dismantled legal segregation, while Harry Truman's desegregation of the military marked incremental progress. Barack Obama's Affordable Care Act expanded healthcare access in marginalized communities, and his criminal justice reforms laid groundwork later diluted by Trump. By contrast, Trump's policies lack comparable scope. The First Step Act, though progressive, cannot match the Voting Rights Act's impact on political enfranchisement, just as opportunity zones pale next to New Deal-era investments in Black infrastructure. Trump's confidence in his claim thrives on historical amnesia, erasing leaders like Johnson or Ulysses S. Grant, who fought the Ku Klux Klan during Reconstruction, to inflate his legacy. His law and order branding and appeals to black voters through initiatives like Black Voices for Trump further reflect a political strategy that prioritizes optics over equity. This narrative deflects from racially charged missteps, such as his equivocal response to the 2017 Charlottesville white supremacist rally, or derogatory remarks about shithole countries, which laid bare a worldview at odds with inclusive governance. Jackson's skepticism, however, mirrors a broader distrust in communities long marginalized by empty promises. The administration's rhetoric, epitomized by Kushner's tone-deaf comment, underscores a detachment from realities like overpoliced neighborhoods, underfunded schools, and healthcare deserts. For Jackson, the absence of black voices in policymaking and the erosion of civil rights protections signal not progress, but regression.
And his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, said this week about the black community that Trump, quote, can't want them to be successful more than they want to be successful. What do you make of these types of comments coming out of this administration, Sam?
Well, first of all, I can't take a lot that Jared Kushner said seriously. I mean, he is Jared Kushner, right? So why should we, listen to what he has to say? Especially, I mean, how many black people you really think he knows or talks to on a regular basis so he can understand that?
Samuel L. Jackson's pointed dismissal of Jared Kushner's remarks. Well, first of all, I can't take a lot that Jared Kushner said seriously. I mean, he is Jared Kushner, right? Reflects a broader critique of systemic privilege, performative allyship, and the Trump administration's failure to engage authentically with Black America. At its core, Jackson's disdain stems from Kushner's perceived detachment from the lived realities of Black communities, compounded by his role as a wealthy, white policymaker who wielded influence without accountability. As a senior advisor in the Trump administration, Kushner oversaw initiatives like the First Step Act and Opportunity Zones, policies touted as progressive yet criticized for their limited scope and neoliberal framing. Jackson's rhetorical question, how many black people do you really think he knows or talks to on a regular basis, highlights the administration's glaring lack of black representation in leadership roles, with figures like Ben Carson and Jaron Smith serving as rare exceptions in a cabinet dominated by white, affluent insiders. This absence of diverse voices in decision-making spaces underscored a pattern of policymaking divorced from the systemic barriers facing Black Americans, such as redlining, mass incarceration, and voter suppression. Kushner's remark that Trump can't want them to be successful more than they want to be successful further crystallized Jackson's frustration. The comment, steeped in neoliberal individualism, reduced centuries of institutionalized racism to a matter of personal ambition, ignoring structural inequities like the racial wealth gap, where the median white household holds 10 times the wealth of a black household, or discriminatory policing, evidenced by disproportionately high black incarceration rates.
So that's not something that I, take in. The administration is the administration. We know who they are.
For Jackson, a lifelong advocate for racial justice who marched with MLK and later used his platform to critique systemic oppression, Kushner's words epitomized the administration's willful ignorance. They echoed a long history of blaming marginalized communities for their struggles while absolving systems of power, a dynamic Jackson had witnessed firsthand growing up in segregated Tennessee. Moreover, Jackson's skepticism was amplified by the administration's track record of hollow gestures. While Kushner championed opportunity zones as economic lifelines, studies revealed that tax breaks often enriched developers rather than uplifting marginalized neighborhoods. Similarly, the First Step Act, though lauded for reducing sentences, excluded many drug-related charges and failed to address root causes like racial profiling. These policies, paired with Trump's racially charged rhetoric, e.g., calling black communities living in hell while slashing fair housing protections, painted a picture of performative progress. Jackson's critique, therefore, was not merely personal but structural. Kushner symbolized a power structure that co-opts the language of empowerment while perpetuating systemic neglect. Ultimately, Jackson's dismissal of Kushner transcends individual animus. It critiques a system where privilege insulates decision-makers from accountability, where policies are crafted in echo chambers of whiteness, and where allyship is reduced to paternalistic sound bites. By framing Kushner as emblematic of this disconnect, Jackson challenges audiences to demand leadership rooted not in rhetoric, but in lived experience and equitable action. Ultimately, the debate between Trump's assertions and Jackson's critique transcends partisan politics. It is a referendum on how America confronts its racial legacy. Trump's narrative, buoyed by cherry-picked data and symbolic gestures, seeks to redefine progress through a lens of political convenience. Jackson's demand for evidence, diverse representation, systemic reforms, and accountability challenges this facade, insisting that true advancement requires dismantling barriers rather than masking them with rhetoric. As the nation grapples with unresolved inequities, this clash underscores a pivotal truth. Confidence in leadership demands not historical revisionism, but a reckoning with the past and a commitment to justice that transcends performative allyship.
Now, do you know this?
No, I don't.
Because it's very exciting.
Oh,
For
really?
me, because he doesn't like me either, and so anytime
okay.
there's somebody new he doesn't like, I feel a fraternity, a brotherhood with this.
Okay, so we're having beef?
You're having beef because I guess you said in an interview that you were a better golfer than him, and then you told a story. Is this true that he signed you up for one of your golf clubs and didn't tell you?
Yeah.
He said he didn't know you. I actually have his
Oh, let
tweet
me see
right
the
here.
tweet.
This is very exciting. So there you go. It says, I don't know Samuel L. Jackson, to best of my knowledge, haven't played golf with him, and think he does too many TV commercials. Boring, not a fan.
The studio of Late Night with Seth Meyers thrummed with a restless energy as Samuel L. Jackson settled into the guest chair, facing host Seth Meyers under the glare of studio lights. The set was a late-night archetype, a polished desk, cushioned seats, and the sprawling New York City skyline backdrop, its twinkling lights a silent testament to the city's unyielding pulse. Cameras rolled, framing the duo, while a live audience perched in the shadows, their anticipation crackling though their voices stayed mute in the transcript. The spark of the night was a supposed feud between Jackson and Donald Trump, ignited when Meyers unveiled a tweet from the former president. I don't know Samuel L. Jackson to best of my knowledge. Haven't played golf with him and think he does too many TV commercials. Boring, not a fan. Jackson's face lit up, a grin spreading as he leaned in, his voice a mix of mock surprise and relish. No, I don't know about this feud, he said, laughter bubbling beneath, but it's very exciting. Oh, really? For me, because he doesn't like me either, and anytime there's somebody new he doesn't like, I feel a fraternity, a brotherhood with this. The line was vintage Jackson, turning a barb into a bond, a nod to his knack for finding humor in conflict. The audience likely roared as he unfurled his first tale. Trump had signed him up for a golf club without his consent, saddling him with a bill he refused to pay. I got a bill that I didn't pay, he said, his tone dripping with dry incredulity. I had no idea, and I haven't been there in 3 years. They said, you're a member, here's your number, and charged me some pool fee. My assistant called and told them I don't belong to that club. It was a petty grievance, but it hinted at a deeper history, a brush with Trump's world of privilege and presumption that Jackson shrugged off with casual defiance. The real meat came with Trump's denial of knowing him, a claim Jackson met with a storyteller's zeal. I've met him a lot, he asserted, his voice steady, eyes glinting. I've played golf with him. One day at Trump National in Jersey, it was me, Trump, and Anthony Anderson. We saw him hook a ball into a lake clear as day. His caddy took off running, came back dry as a bone, and said, I got it, Mr. Trump. Did you see a splash? I saw a splash. The room surely erupted, caught by the absurdity in Jackson's deadpan flair, a subtle skewer of Trump's honesty, or lack thereof, on the fairway. He pressed on. He used to call me Samuel L. Badon, he'd say, fumbling my name. One time in New York, he rang me up. Hey, are you busy today? Want to play golf? I said, sure. He wasn't playing, but he set me up with a friend at his club on this side of the bridge. When I got there, it was President Clinton. Jackson let the name hang, a heavyweight cameo, then added, Trump showed up mid-round, took Bill into the clubhouse, bought him a jacket because it was chilly and gave me nothing. I had my own jacket, though. I was good. The jacket detail was a gem, small but sharp, a personal slight spun into a punchline with effortless cool. Mayers leapt in, his voice playful yet pointed. If we can prove he's lying about not knowing you, this might be the thing that finally brings down his campaign. Jackson smirked, nodding. Let's get on that. The quip was a late-night staple, a wink at Trump's political longevity, still a lightning rod in 2025, whether he was running again or just stoking headlines. As they cut to, "We'll be right back," the studio buzzed with laughter and intrigue, a fleeting clash of titans distilled into a few minutes of airtime. This exchange didn't spring from nowhere. It was a collision of histories, personalities, and a nation's tangled threads. Trump's tweet wasn't just a random jab, it echoed his decades-long playbook. Since the 1980s, he'd cultivated a brash, larger-than-life image, real estate mogul, TV star, then president, using media to amplify his voice, especially after 2015 when Twitter, now X, became his megaphone. By 2025, his penchant for dismissing critics with a flick of the keyboard was legend, honed during his 2016 and 2020 campaigns and the chaotic years that followed. Calling Jackson boring for his TV ads was peak Trump, ironic, given his own saturation on screens via The Apprentice and relentless news cycles. The golf angle, too, was no surprise. Trump's courses were status symbols, a playground for the elite, and his competitive streak on the links was well documented. Stories of questionable scorekeeping had trailed him since his pre-political days. His denial of Jackson fit a pattern of selective memory, a tactic to distance himself from inconvenient ties, especially as political winds shifted post-2020. Jackson's side of the story had its own roots. A titan of film since the 1990s, think Pulp Fiction, The Avengers, he'd built a persona that blended gravitas with grit, his booming voice and sharp wit making him a cultural force. By 2025, his ubiquity in commercials, those Capital One ads Trump mocked, had only amplified his reach, a deliberate choice to stay visible in a Hollywood landscape increasingly dominated by streaming and younger stars. His outspokenness, too, was no secret, tweets and interviews often laced with political barbs, especially against Trump, whom he'd criticized since the 2016 election for his policies and persona. The golf club incident and name-dropping Clinton weren't random flexes, they tied to Jackson's own brushes with power. Raised in segregated Tennessee, he'd marched in the civil rights era, later mingling with moguls and presidents alike. Clinton, a frequent golf buddy, was a recurring figure in his orbit. These anecdotes were more than rebuttals. They were Jackson staking his place in a world Trump claimed to define. The feud's timing wasn't accidental either. In 2025, America remained a fractured stage, post-Trump presidency, post-pandemic, mid-Biden era or beyond, depending on elections. Trump's shadow loomed large, whether he was gearing up for another run or just stirring the pot via X, his posts still fodder for a polarized public. Golf, a sport of wealth and leisure, was itself a loaded symbol. Trump's courses had been lightning rods during his tenure, from tax break controversies to protest sites. Jackson calling out a caddy's dry return wasn't just funny. It tapped into a cultural vein of skepticism about Trump's authenticity, a narrative that had simmered since his birther days and spiked with every alternative fact. Meanwhile, Jackson's fraternity quip resonated in a nation still reckoning with race, class, and power. His humor a bridge to viewers who'd long seen Trump as an outsider to their struggles. Late-night TV was the perfect crucible for this clash. Since Johnny Carson, it's been a space where politics and pop culture collide, but by 2025, its role had sharpened. After Jon Stewart redefined satire in the 2000s, hosts like Mayers, Rye, Liberal, Ex-Savvy had become cultural commentators, their stages a nightly pulse check on America's mood. Trump was a perennial target, his bombast a gift to comics, and Jackson's visit fit a pattern. Celebrities airing grievances, settling scores, all while feeding a hungry audience. The campaign line was hyperbole, sure, but it nodded to a real tension. Could a lie about golf, however trivial, dent Trump's Teflon armor in a media age where every slip was dissected? Jackson's words carried weight beyond the laughs. His insistence, "I've met him a lot," was a rhythmic drumbeat, grounding his tales in lived truth. The caddy story was a morality sketch, a wink at Trump's reputation for bending rules, while the Clinton jacket moment was a status play. Trump prioritizing a political peer over a cultural icon, yet Jackson brushing it off with "I was good," a quiet assertion of self. His tone, confident, playful, never bitter, mirrored his career, a man who'd climbed from Chattanooga to the A-list, unfazed by slights. For the audience, it was catnip, a Hollywood legend taking on a political Goliath, all with a smirk and a splash. As the lights dimmed for the break, the moment lingered, a snapshot of 2025 restless spirit. Trump's denial, Jackson's riposte, Mayer's jab, they were threads in a larger tapestry, weaving fame, power, and a nation's fractured identity into a few minutes of late-night gold. It was personal, yes, but it was also America talking to itself, through two outsized voices and a stage built for the fray. The ideological clash between Trump's rhetoric and Jackson's critique, rooted in systemic inequities and historical amnesia, extends beyond policy debates into the realm of personal narratives and media spectacle. This tension between political posturing and lived experience is vividly illustrated in a seemingly trivial yet symbolically charged feud that unfolded on Late Night with Seth Meyers in 2025. There, Jackson's anecdotes about Trump, whether recounting absurd golf encounters or mocking his neoliberal dismissiveness, transcended mere entertainment. These stories became a microcosm of the broader disconnect between performative allyship and tangible progress. Just as Trump's claims of advancing racial justice crumble under scrutiny of his policies, his denial of knowing Jackson, a figure emblematic of Black cultural influence, reveals a pattern of erasure and privilege. The late-night stage, with its blend of humor and critique, mirrors the national conversation, a battleground where systemic issues like wealth gaps and voter suppression collide with the personal, the absurd, and the performative. Jackson's wry storytelling, juxtaposed against Trump's revisionist bravado, underscores a universal truth. That progress is measured not in cherry-picked metrics or hollow gestures, but in accountability to history and the voices it too often silences. Samuel L. Jackson's razor-sharp clash with Donald Trump, a mosaic of wry anecdotes, piercing truths, and a fierce demand for accountability, leaves us staring down a defining crossroads. What echoes loudest in your soul after this showdown of giants? Was it Trump cast as a trickster on the fairway, his denials a flimsy veil over a lake's silent splash? The stark unraveling of his Lincoln-esque boasts, a hollow throne crumbling under the weight of history's gaze. Or Jackson's voice rising as a griot of our time, his tales a sword against the mirage of performative progress. We're turning the mic to you. Did Jackson's blend of humor and gravitas ignite your own skepticism? Or did the vivid threads, cat is dodging truth, jackets bestowed on chosen kings, crystallize the stakes in a way facts alone can't? Maybe you've watched figures like Trump shift from brash showmen to architects of division in your own story. Drop your reflections in the comments below. We're ready to unpack this with you. Smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell to join our community of truth seekers. Your engagement fuels our mission to dissect the lies, champion the marginalized, and spotlight warriors like Jackson who refuse to let history repeat its darkest verses. Thank you for watching. The battle for justice is a marathon, not a sprint. Stay tuned, stay loud, and we'll see you in the next chapter.